"Oh, the Lord save us," Tug moaned. "'Tis 20 after 1, and we got no Santa Claus at all. When the town clock struck 2, it seemed that every child in Chippewa was milling around the decorated municipal Christmas tree. His Honor the Mayor and the members of the Common Council stood around in various attitudes of chilled municipal rectitude, stamping their cold feet on the tall pine platform which stood beside the lofty tinseled spruce tree. They were flanked by baskets and cartons of oranges and candies. Here they would officially greet dear old Santa, present him with the keys to the city, and help him dispense the Christmas goodies to the dear little tots of the sterling mothers and fathers and voters of Chippewa. Down Main Street and along Bank Street as far as the fire hall, the official route was crowded with people, mothers, fathers, cynically dubious older children, miners, lumberjacks, farmers, even Big Annie and her girls. Mattie and the boys had taken up their stand at the fountain. They wanted a good look at Buller in his new role. Agile Timmy had managed to scramble up alongside Chief Booze-in-the-Face, the better to witness the public triumph of one of the boys from Hungry Hollow. Back on the platform, the mayor and council members stirred uneasily. Here it was 2:15, and still no Santa. "Where's Santa Claus? We want Santa!" childish voices began piping up around them. The distraught mayor and his council fell into a whispered huddle from which they emerged and returned like members of a stupid backfield. "Boo! If I can't see Santa Claus, I won't take my cough medicine, Mama." At this unhappy juncture there was a prolonged cheer from down Main Street. "There he comes! Here comes Santa!" The mayor and council hastily resumed their broken ranks, bowing and smiling benignly at themselves and at everyone. Everything had turned out all right, just as they had known it would all along. Sliver Anderson slowly drove the big red fire truck out of the fire hall, with Tug Cooney and Skinner McKittrick standing on each running board at rigid blue-coated attention. Tug and Skinner served as Santa's guard of honor, and also to keep overzealous juveniles from clambering up into Santa's lap, if not into his very whiskers. And there, on the very top of the fire truck, in regal splendor, sat enthroned the twinklingest, plumpest, jolliest, merriest Santa Claus that Chippewa had ever seen. Santa Claus was indeed in rare form. He bowed and chuckled his way down Bank Street, keeping up a running fire of sally and quaint comment along the way. Yep. As Santa passed by the public fountain, he gaily winked and waved at Big Annie and the boys, tugging fiercely at his flowing mustaches, as if to show the whole world that at last this was the real McCoy. With a little sigh, Timmy slipped from the side of Chief Booze-in-the-Face and landed on the snow-packed street next to Mattie. Dreamy-eyed Mattie wanted company and was pleased. "What's matter, you, Timmy? You be little drunk, too?" Mattie confidentially inquired. Timmy kept staring up at the bowing and gesticulating Santa Claus. My God, it's the old man. It's old Danny hisself," he said in an awed voice. Everyone agreed later that never before had Chippewa been visited by such a wonderful Santa Claus. From the time old Santa climbed down from his fire truck and made his chuckling way up to the platform and heartily pumped the limp hands of a bewildered mayor and common council, to the final moment when he joyfully passed out the last orange, took the last letter, and resoundingly kissed the last child, this was a Santa Claus that warmed the heart, gladdened the soul, and removed the last lingering doubt from the mind. Nobody minded that Santa, amidst the general confusion and in his jolly zeal, occasionally planted a resounding kiss on some of the comelier mothers instead of their offspring. It was with a collective sigh of genuine regret that the crowd watched old Santa finally clamber back on his throne, and drive triumphantly back to the fire hall, where the tall wooden doors majestically swung closed behind him. Number 22, Death and Resurrection, The Last Story. Danny was so swollen with pride over his howling success as Santa Claus that he stayed on in Chippewa, celebrating his new role until well into January. As usual, he established himself in the bridal suite at the Chippewa house. The old brick hotel was his main base of operations, being centrally located in his favorite tavern district. Finally, one morning, Danny came slowly down the creaking hotel stairs and appeared before Mrs. Smedberg with his pack-sack and snowshoes. His hands were shaking violently as he paid his bill. After serving a generation of carousing miners, lumberjacks, and trappers, this phenomenon did not unduly impress Mrs. Smedberg. Alcoholic jitters were an old story to her, but she had never seen Danny or any of her customers grow quite so plump and puffy during their bouts with John Barleycorn. It was most remarkable. "What's the matter, Daniel?" Mrs. Smedberg peered at him. "You were all swelled up like a poisoned pup. Just take one good look at yourself." Danny peered into the rippled mirror over the lobby desk. "Oh, my God," he exclaimed, feeling his pouched, round cheeks. "I guess I went to the well oncet too often," he moaned, staring at himself in awed fascination. "If I wasn't so old, I'd swear I was going to have a baby." He felt his forehead. "Oh, my God, I'm burning up with fever. Take hold of my head, Mrs. Smedberg." Terror filled Danny's eyes as the widow Smedberg tenderly placed her toil-roughened palm across his brow. Her maternal instincts were immediately aroused. "By golly, Daniel, you do have on terrible fever. Better you go back upstairs to bed, and I will call a doctor." "No, no," Danny exclaimed, hoisting his pack-sack over his shoulders. "If I'm gonna up and die, it's gonna be out to the holler. I don't belong to die no other place." He took a farewell peek at himself in the mirror. "If I ever get out of this here alive, I'm going to take the pledge and sell my goddamn still for junk to Ruttenberg." Danny was at the door. "And if I don't come through, Mrs. Smedberg," Danny gulped, "I want you to know that I thank you a whole lot for putting up with all my dibblement and hell-raising for all these years. It was mighty fine of you. Mighty fine." Mrs. Smedberg blinked and sniffed and removed her spectacles to wipe the mist away. "There's just one more thing I want to tell you, Mrs. Smedberg," Danny began, a seizure of confession being upon him. "What's that?" Mrs. Smedberg asked. "I was the one what stole the Gideon Bible that there time. Do you mind the time?" Danny said, hanging his swollen head in shame. Mrs. Smedberg blinked her pale blue eyes at Dan. "I knew it, Daniel," she said quietly. "I knew it all along. I will give you 6 Bibles if they'll pull you through this awful illness." "No, thank you, ma'am," Danny said, gently closing the hotel door. The boys were at supper. Buller noticed Dan's swollen condition as soon as the old man dragged himself into camp. Danny stood swaying in the light. "Danny," Buller exclaimed, "how many pounds of Peerless are you chewing, man? My God, where you been at?" "My God, where ain't I been at?" Danny said. Buller caught him just as he started to fall. He and the boys tenderly laid the old man out on the bunk. Taconite and Swan quickly undressed him as Timmy got out the nightshirt and tasseled cap from Danny's pack-sack. Buller mixed up a double hot toddy and brought it over to the bunk. "Danny," he said gently, "Danny, wake up, old man, and take this here hot drink." Danny opened one eye. "Take it away," he said in a muffled whisper. "Take that goddamn vial fluid away." Danny closed his eyes and relapsed into troubled, ratchety slumber. Buller and the boys stared round-eyed at each other. When Danny refused a drink of whiskey, the end could not be far away. "Shall we go get Doc Gordo?" Buller whispered in an awed voice. The boys nodded their heads solemnly. Doc Gordo was nominated. Since Doc Gordo was a rheumatic old practitioner who lived in Chippewa, this meant the boys had to pull him into camp from Matty's farm on the Toboggan. The plowed road ended at Matty's. Buller and Taconite and Swan quickly got into their rubber boots and woolen jumpers. Timmy lit them out with the long flashlight as they adjusted their snowshoes in front of the camp. It was snowing hard, and the wind was rising. "You gotta save him till we get back with the doc," Buller said hoarsely, raising his mittened hand to Timmy in bleak farewell. "It shall be done," Timmy answered, squaring his jaw as he shut the camp door against the swirling storm. Danny still lay in deep slumber, his breathing troubled and difficult, and his cheeks seemed to be getting fatter by the minute. Timmy hovered over him helplessly, tucking in the covers, arranging the tassel of his nightcap. Then he shaded the lamp and sat at the oilcloth table, working on one of his crossword puzzles. The restless wind searched and pried at the logs of the camp, moaning and whistling. Timmy had dozed over his puzzle. It was midnight. "Timmy!" It was Danny, sitting up in his bunk, his eyes bright and feverish, his face swollen into fantastic proportions. Timmy hurried to his side. "What is it, Danny?" Timmy said anxiously. "Give me a drink." Danny mouthed his words as though indeed he had a monstrous chew of tobacco in each cheek. "Give me a drink," he repeated. "Whiskey?" Timmy hopefully inquired. "Water," Danny said, "and lots of it. I'm burning up." After his drink, Danny seemed to rest easier. "You'll be all right soon, Dan," Timmy volunteered. Danny shook his swollen head. In the swelling process, his droopy mustaches had been drawn up into a brisk military aspect, faintly reminiscent of von Hindenburg. Danny kept shaking his head. "I'm not the man I used to be," he said sadly. "What's more, I never was." "You'll be all right," Timmy repeated. "'Cept for my goddamn head, I feel 4 pounds lighter'n an old straw hat," Danny said. "You'll be all right," Timmy said doggedly, as though the phrase possessed some magic properties. Danny shook his head dolefully. "I'm afraid this is the last of the old man." He was in the reflective mood, which is said to possess some men as the end draws near. "It's a funny thing, Timmy. Last week I felt as strong as a hull team of horses with a little dog running behind. My poor old mother, God bless her, she's dead now, lived to be 94, and here I'm up and dying afore I even get my growth. Yep, it's a goddamn funny thing." Timmy turned away and fumbled in the medicine cabinet. He surreptitiously wiped the mist from his eyes. He rattled the bottles and jars and came over and placed a bottle of Sloane's liniment and Grover's mange cure on the chair beside Danny's bunk. "Can I rub you, Danny?" he said, ever solicitous. But Danny did not want to be rubbed. He wanted to talk. Mouthing his words through his puffed cheeks, he rambled on about his childhood in Canada, of the girl he should have married back there, of how he wanted to be buried on the birch ridge in back of the camp, of how he wanted Timmy and the boys and Bessie to carry on the same as before, just as though nothing had happened. Danny was nodding over his pillow. "There's just one thing more I want," he mumbled. "What's that?" Timmy asked, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Provided I last the night out, I want just one more look at good old Bessie." Danny's head slumped over on his pillow. Once again he had fallen into a deep and troubled sleep. The next morning, a little after daybreak, Buller and Matty and the boys arrived with old Dr. Gordo, sitting huddled on the toboggan. It had stopped snowing. Timmy was just leading a disconsolate Bessie away from the camp door. Her bell tinkled dolefully. Danny had had his last look. The boys kicked off their snowshoes and tugged old Doc to his feet. "He's still alive?" Dr. Gordo asked Timmy in his guttural French-Canadian voice. Timmy, pale, tight-lipped, and on the verge of tears, grimly nodded his head. Old Doc Gordo had come to Chippewa years before as a dewy-eyed young medical student fresh out of McGill. Since then, he had been through mine disasters, riots, and strikes, fire, famine, and flood. Still, it saddened him that he must now attend the passing of that old pine knot, his fellow Canadian, Danny McGinnis. Danny was sitting up in bed, his eyes bright and watchful, as Dr. Gordo and little Matty and the boys gathered silently around his bunk. Doc placed his satchel on the floor beside him and threw off his big buffalo coat, the same one he had brought with him from Canada years before. "Hello, Danny. What's all this foolish talk I hear about you going to die?" Doc asked, as waggish physicians have ever been prone to do. Danny's feverish eyes were darting bird-like about the room. His cheeks were swollen to enormous proportions. "Hello, Doc," he mumbled listlessly. "I guess you heard it correct." Dr. Gordo, with his oily black mustache, which partially hid his pendulous wet lip, was the composite picture of all the weary, baggy-eyed elder statesmen of old France. He rolled up his shirt sleeves and took Danny's pulse. Matty and the boys pressed closer. Doc said. He took Danny's temperature and read it carefully. He said, jutting out his lower lip. "Let's see your tongue," old Doc said to Danny. Danny opened his swollen cheeks and stuck out his tongue. It had the hue and general aspect of a soiled Turkish towel. Doc said. Danny sat up in bed. He wanted to make a statement. This was the end. Why hold back now? "Listen, boys. Doc, you're a witness. When I'm gone, I want you to put a quart of whiskey, a full quart, mind, on the lid of my coffin. If it's still there the next morning, nail down the goddamn lid. I'm dead." Doc said, pouting out his fat lower lip and slowly shaking his head. With great deliberation, he reached into his satchel and brought forth a quart of old cordwood. He placed the bottle on the chair beside the liniment and the mange cure. He looked around at the boys and then down at Danny, counting. "Bring 7 glasses, please," he said. "What's he got, Doc?" the boys said in one voice. Doc Gordo turned his veinous brown eyes to the boys. They waited eagerly for the verdict. Doc said. "What you think?" "For God's sake, tell us," Buller said. "He's suffering from hangover, plus," Doc said. "Plus what?" "Plus mumps," Doc said quietly. "Mumps!" the boys cried in unison. Doc nodded his head in assent. "Mumps," he repeated firmly, wearily reaching for the bottle. This concludes the reading of Danny and the Boys by Robert Traver. This book was read by Wolfram Kandinsky.